Two, one. Okay, we are live on YouTube. We are waiting on Facebook. And what is up with Facebook? There we go. Now we're live. Everybody, welcome. This is the Daily Bullet. We are recording this one on Monday. Well, we were doing this one live on Monday, the 8th of February, 2020. I'm Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. This is our daily program where we discuss the Second Amendment events of the day. Joining me today for the first time as a commentator, Amy Dillon. She writes for Shooting Industry Magazine, writes for a few other places, and Second Amendment advocate, DC. Amy, I'm just going to hand over to you. There's too much. I'm going to forget it. Introduce yourself, if you would, please.
No problem. Thanks for having me on the Daily Bullet, Paul. As you said, my name's Amy Dillon. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served 12 and a half years in the Marine Corps. I was a drill instructor, and I'm also a former combat marksmanship trainer. I started in the firearms industry 10 years ago, and in my career, I'm an instructor, chief range safety officer, consultant, and writer. I'm also a shooting sports competitor. My articles can be found on Shooting Industry Magazine, U.S. Concealed Carry Association, guns.com, and I'm starting to write for the Gun Mag as well. It's pretty busy, and I do a lot of advocacy work as well, which is what I'm going to share with you guys tonight.
Very cool. Yeah, let's get straight into the advocacy work because I think that's really important. You were last week in South Carolina, and you testified on what it's H3094. And
yeah, so
go ahead.
Well, so South Carolina is one of just a few states that don't have any open carry allowance. So one of the representatives, Bobby Cox, who's out of the 21st District in South Carolina, he introduced a bill to the House Judicial Committee last week, and it's H3094, which is the Open Carry with Training Act. So I was actually in South Carolina testifying and providing an expert testimonial to the House Judicial Committee, for obviously in support of the bill. And it was, South Carolina, it being a very pro-gun state, I guess you could say, really is one of the strictest states when it comes to no allowance for open carry at all. And so this bill proposes basically just changing the legislative wording to say that persons that have a permit recognized in South Carolina would be able to choose to carry either concealed or open. And of course, nothing else changes as far as prohibited carry locations, or anything like that. But surprisingly, a lot of the testimonial that I was hearing from these, quote unquote experts on the other side of the aisle, for example, there was a witness or speaking on behalf of the Moms Demand Action, her argument was that she didn't want to have guns being carried openly where her children go to school or where her children, are at, and or didn't want to see people carrying, didn't think alcohol and guns should mix. And, one of the things that I rebutted her with was, well, in South Carolina, it is already in the law that you can't carry even with a permit in places where schools, colleges, universities, daycares, preschool facilities. And there's also a law that prohibits a person from carrying while consuming alcohol. Another thing that got brought up from a professor who, I think School of Law, I forgot what college or university he taught at, but he brought up, I don't know how this is going to affect a person who is carrying when they were interacting with law enforcement officers. And in South Carolina, I brought this topic up again after his testimony, was that in South Carolina, it's up to the permit holder that whenever they're interacting with a law enforcement officer, they need to be the ones to inform the officer that they're carrying and present their identification if asked. So there's a lot of policies, laws, procedures that are taught to the concealed weapon permit holder in South Carolina, that, those arguments weren't very strong arguments. As long as the person was educated as far as, what or what not to do. But in South Carolina, it's already required, because we're a state that we require training before you apply for a permit. So It's one of the strictest states as far as training is concerned as well.
Okay. So that was last week you testified. I believe it was on Thursday, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so I think you said as we were discussing this pre-show that it's actually coming up for a hearing, a public hearing tomorrow, right?
Yes. Well, on Wednesday, so Wednesday of this week, so the day after tomorrow, and I'm pulling up my notes here because I just got notice of this today. It's coming up to a public hearing, and this is anyone, because if anyone travels to South Carolina where your permit is recognized, this would affect you too. You can provide a virtual testimony by emailing hjudgenlaws@schouse.gov. So that's hjudgenlaws@schouse.gov by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow, and you can provide video or written testimony, and people can also appear in person at the South Carolina State House building to provide testimony as well. And this is Wednesday at 9:00 a.m.
Okay, all right, very cool. We're getting some social media commentary that I need to discuss here. First off, let me see if I can get this. Where is it? I'll just read it because I'm having problems getting my social media insert into the broadcast. But John says, I know you said you'll be discussing the first responder program this week. Is that still in the week's pipeline? Ready to get started, sir? Yes, John, it is. I'm later in the week. I do plan on having a discussion about that, and Glenn Caroline. I'm trying to get Glenn Caroline on, but that's all of a scheduling thing. So, Amy, the other thing, and then let me do one fast. There we go. And this just for your edification, Amy. John says, "I like her." Smiley face. So,
thank you.
There's all kinds of throughout the states, all the red states are pushing forward on either enhancing concealed carry or getting rid of permits for carry. Both Utah and Montana are going to be doing that. Like you said, South Carolina is pushing open carry, and that, any state that allows concealed carry, I cannot see. I don't personally open carry, and there's a lot of reasons. Maybe we can discuss them here in a little bit. But as a rule, I don't open carry in public. But I believe you ought to be able to. For one thing, it makes a very big political statement when somebody's open carrying. Somebody out in public, hey, I'm a good guy, and I'm out here with the rest of you. It helps to normalize.
Well, and not only that, because I don't choose to open carry even in states where I'm able to as well. Mm-hmm. But, part of my testimony is I believe in the freedom of choice. Mm-hmm. And just to make a practical point, I guess, if I'm in my car open carrying, which sometimes I do just because it's easier, if I'm stepping outside because I'm getting gas, or if, I have something going on with my car that I need to check out, I wouldn't have to worry about, having to then conceal my firearm. It would just make things easier as far as being able to be more flexible with my movement. And again, that freedom of choice, I think, is important. I don't think that the government should dictate to me how I should carry.
Absolutely. And also, even in a state, let's say, like my current situation, I'm carrying an inside the waistband holster right now, but I'm wearing a very old T-shirt, and I've grown a little bit. I don't go vertically anymore, but I've grown a little bit since I bought the T-shirt. You know, right now, if I were to stand up, the handle of my shield, the grip would show. If
Right.
inadvertent exposure, that is a huge thing. Ask anybody in Florida what a big deal inadvertent exposure is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or printing even.
Yeah. So things like this just take we lost our rights in the states little bit by little bit, and it's federally too. We're going to get it back little bit by little bit by little bit.
Right. That reminds me. So it's funny how, because I've been in a lot of groups talking about this specific bill, and you know, seeing who is supporting it, who has problems with it, and it's interesting because there are people that when this bill was being introduced, that were 2A supporters that were kind of angry at us supporting this bill versus, well, why aren't you pushing for constitutional carry? And you know, my response is that we need to, you know, just as our rights can be eroded little by little by little, sometimes we have to take that same approach when it comes to fighting for our, you know, freedoms back, I guess.
You know, and this Utah is a great example of that. Utah was one of the very first states after Florida started the big kick for a shall issue. Utah was one of the first states to join them, and then open carry came along, and it's just now 2021 that they may be getting permitless carry. It takes time,
Right.
and and all the stars pretty much have to align. You have to get a freedom loving House, Senate, and governor. You know, South Dakota, we've been very gun friendly for a very long time. We didn't get permitless carry until 2019, after the last governor's election in 2018. So it's you're right. It's a step by step process, and not everything happens all at once, as much as we'd like it to.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll see. You know, I'm hoping that this bill comes to a vote, and we can let that show on the ballot, and people can go from there. But I do believe that any bill that's going to give us the freedom of choice and more, you know, more freedoms in how we're carrying, what we're able to carry, and where we're able to do it, I think that every gun owner should get behind and support. And even if you don't personally, you know, think you'll open carry, again, it's letting others have that freedom of choice and flexibility.
Absolutely. You know, this just kind of popped into my head. Not everybody has a podcast or produces videos or something like that, but everybody supports the First Amendment. And just, I think it's just the same way. Even if you don't open carry, you ought to be able to support the right of others to do it.
Exactly.
And one comment just popped here that I wanna get in. Guns and Barbecue says, as we gun owners need to be proactive and not reactive, perhaps if we got anti-gunners on the ropes, we wouldn't have to worry so much about anti-gun legislation, because they would be countering us. And that's very true. It's good to have the other side on the ropes. Amy, do you think that this in South Carolina is putting the antis on the ropes?
I think that there's going to be, you know, they're going to kind of see more support that they might not think is there. You know, it's really hard to say, because we just have never been, I guess there's never been vocal support for open carry. And I think it's because a lot of people choose not to. You know, but I think this is going to kind of push people out of the woodwork, so to speak, on how many people actually support responsibly armed citizens carrying guns.
Absolutely. Roderick, and this is going to be our last comment because we've got to cut to the video here in about a minute. I had my first training around 1980 before I got my first Indiana CCW permit. The sheriff told us if he caught us on the dancing floor with your .44 Magnum flopping around, we'd be thrown in jail. We now have a choice. And that's great. I mean, that just goes to show. I mean, from 19, well, yes, it's been what 41 years since 1980, but we're gaining our rights back. And despite what's happening federally, I think that's going to continue. All right. Well, let me do this. Amy, I want to thank you for joining us. If you could, one more time, let everybody know where they can find your stuff, and then we're going to go run off to the video.
Sure. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, Amy Dillon, or at adda.may, and you can find my articles on Shooting Industry at Shooting Industry Magazine, Guns.com, the Gun Mag, and the U.S. Concealed Carry Association.
Well, thanks again, Amy. And folks, what we're going to do right now, we're going to go to a video that I recorded last week with Mike and Alex Uli. We're going to be talking about city, county, and state sanctuaries. Hang on for the video and come join us again tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, welcome to another interview segment for the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me again today are Alex and Mike Uli of the Uli Law Offices in Indiana. And we're going to be talking a little bit about a trend that has been happening lately. And it started in Virginia, really is where it really got legs and has really exploded throughout the nation. And that's sanctuary cities, sanctuary counties, sanctuary states. We're going to explore that whole genre right now. Thanks for joining us today, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure as always.
So let's talk sanctuaries. First of all, let's explore a little bit about what a sanctuary generally looks like. Either a city, a county, or a state will say, look, we're not going to spend any money and we're not going to let any of our employees enforce any further restrictions on the Second Amendment. It doesn't necessarily make the federal regulation or law illegal. It just says we're not spending state money to do it, is it, or city or county money? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's basically correct, Paul. And sanctuaries don't really have a specific definition. There's no one-size-fits-all model that has been followed. Generally, what has happened is that counties and states throughout the country have adopted what are called resolutions. They're not even laws per se. They're simply statements that the locality, the county or the state or the city, is not going to enforce or spend any resources to enforce what they consider unconstitutional regulations of the Second Amendment. So, like I said, there's not been one particular method or resolution to adopt a sanctuary or make a statement of a sanctuary status. But generally they are resolutions. They're not laws. For localities to enact a law, they actually have to enact an ordinance. And that's not been what most localities have done. So these are mostly just statements that, hey, we support your Second Amendment rights, and we don't intend to use any resources to further what we consider unconstitutional regulations on that right.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that this kind of stems to a great extent from the immigration debate. And I think in the immigration arena, these resolutions or proclamations have had more teeth in terms of they actually preclude local officials from spending any money on enforcement action. In the Second Amendment arena, my impression, this is just one guy's opinion, is they're more just statements and not necessarily proclamations to preclude local governments from spending money. But one thing I think it's important to understand is that under our scheme of laws, the federal government cannot, and generally speaking, cannot compel local officials to enforce federal laws. And that's what's important. So if we see, and we may see this in the future, to the extent there are more gun control laws, we may see more sanctuary city movement momentum. That's hard to say. And I think we may see more local officials and maybe even state officials refusing to spend or allocate resources to the enforcement of federal gun control laws.
So what practical effect will it have, say, for I want to break this out for somebody who may live in Virginia, where I know there are a whole bunch of Second Amendment sanctuary counties, versus somewhere like Oklahoma, which is going to be becoming, it very strongly looks like a Second Amendment sanctuary state. What are the differences? What would be the differences between those two, or would there be any?
So in Virginia, like we discussed a little bit earlier, they have adopted primarily resolutions, as I understand it. So those resolutions adopted by the counties in Virginia, which I believe most of the counties in Virginia have now adopted, they don't have any force of law. They are simply statements about what the local law enforcement or local county commissioners believe about your Second Amendment rights. I'm not familiar with the movement, particularly in Oklahoma, but there are a few states, Alaska, I know there are a few others who have adopted statewide positions with respect to sanctuary status. And in those situations, I think that it's important to understand that the states, as Mike mentioned earlier, can't be forced to further the regulation of your Second Amendment rights. So I think it has more teeth at the state level than it does at the local government level.
Yeah, and I'll use an example. Let's say there's a, quote, high-capacity magazine ban, end quote. I don't like the word high-capacity magazine ban, but we'll use that. It's a political term. Let's say there is one that comes from the federal level. If your local county decides not to enforce that, you've still got to travel to the next county. It's not going to give you much relief in terms of freedom. But if the state in its entirety refuses to allocate resources to enforce that federal law, it's going to have a much, much bigger impact on citizens if states elect to do those sorts of things. And you have to remember, even if a county refused to enforce, for instance, a quote high-capacity magazine ban, you're still going to have state law enforcement officers that may enforce that in the county that's passed the whatever sort of sanctuary resolution they pass, or even potentially an ordinance or a law. So obviously it'll have a much bigger impact. Most law enforcement is at the state level and below in this country. There is very little federal, well, there's too much, but there's still, compared to the states, there's very little law enforcement at the federal level available to enforce what's probably what could be unconstitutional laws.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, there's this concept called anti-commandeering. So back in the 1990s, I believe it was 1997, the United States Supreme Court issued an opinion in Prince saying that the federal government couldn't utilize or couldn't force state or local law enforcement to engage in a gun registration scheme as part of the Brady Handgun Act. So that anti-commandeering concept would also apply in this sort of situation. Like you said, if there were a high-capacity magazine ban or a so-called assault weapons ban, the states could not be compelled to use their law enforcement agencies to further the federal gun control scheme.
So this, and I want to touch back to this doesn't nullify what happens on the federal level. If let's just say, worst case scenario, the federal government says all AR-15s are now illegal. You cannot own an AR-15. If you live in a sanctuary state, that doesn't mean you still can. It means that the federal government can still come and arrest you and charge you with owning an AR-15. It's just the state says they won't. Have I got that right?
That's right, Paul. So no matter what the state or local government's position is with respect to the constitutionality of a particular federal regulation or law, that law still exists. That federal law still exists, and it doesn't cease to exist just because a state declares itself a sanctuary, a Second Amendment sanctuary. So, you're exactly right.
Yeah, under our system, if such a law were passed, obviously, perhaps the Second Amendment Foundation would be involved. It would be challenged in court. We'd expect it to go to the United States Supreme Court. And we have a concept that we've had since the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1802 or 3 that created the concept of judicial review. So the federal judiciary would examine whether that act of Congress was in fact constitutional, that is to say, in accord with our Constitution and lawful or not. If they do that, technically speaking, federal law enforcement could enforce that congressional act.
All right. So from listening to you guys and from the little bit of research I've been able to do, it seems like, especially, and you guys basically have said on the local level, this is sending a statement. On the state level, maybe just a touch more, but I think as Second Amendment advocates, these are kind of cool, but I think we ought to be pressing in other areas. What do you guys think?
Well, I think this is playing defense. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not being critical of these. I think they're great statements for the most part. I think they express an opinion at the local level that state lawmakers look at. I think it's a good thing, but for the most part, it's playing defense. We need to be involved as much as we can offensively so that we do not get bad laws where we need sanctuary or that we need sanctuary from. So that's I think my 2 cents on these. They're defensive rather than offensive. Unless you mentioned the word nullification, unless or, at some point we do get to the point where states really consider, like Jefferson and Madison did in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, about potentially nullifying federal action.
Yeah, I agree, and he's right. This is these sanctuary movements are more defensive movements rather than offensive movements. So to the extent that we can protect our rights by being on the offensive, we'll be in a better situation for sure. These sanctuaries are mostly political statements, and they do some good because it provides the citizens of these localities some reassurance that their local politicians at least have some semblance of a respect for their rights. So it's good in that way, and it does support a larger movement, maybe bring people attention to the push for our Second Amendment rights.
And I think it does help flush out, especially local politicians, where they really stand on the Second Amendment. We have so many politicians that say, I support the Second Amendment. They're not pushed on what that means. We know probably what it means is they think they think folks ought to be able to go duck hunting with a single-shot shotgun. So these sorts of debates at the local level that occur in procuring these resolutions do help folks press their local officials. I mean, for instance, you can press the local sheriff. What are you going to do if there's a ban on AR-15s in this country? Are you going to enforce that? And really press them on those things, and you'll know where they stand. And these debates, like I said, really flush out the opinions from local officials.
And we saw that here in Indiana. I'm sure that you can see these sorts of things in other states like Virginia, but some sheriffs in Indiana really drag their feet about taking a position with respect to the sanctuary movement. So to the extent that people notice that and that it has an effect on your vote at the next election, I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. I would agree with there. And at some point, I mean, because we're all aging, we're not going to be working forever. At some point, local people want to move up. And if you can find out where they stand when they're local, you can bring that up when they want to go up to the next level, whether that be state or federal or whatever. If you can get them to commit early, I mean, let's face it, politicians can always backpedal, but a solid statement early really helps.
Yeah, we saw that, like I'll reiterate what Alex, we saw that in Indiana. Some sheriffs clearly consider themselves strictly law enforcement. That is to say, they're going to enforce the law. Other sheriffs really view their role, and I think rightly so, as a constitutional official that's there to protect the rights of the folks that voted them into office. So it really does help you draw some lines in terms of distinguishing the philosophy of, your local sheriff, for instance. And it could be your legislator, too, if it's at the state level. So.
All right, well, we're coming up on the time we have for today. If I could, guys, I realize I didn't, the last time we had you on, I didn't ask you to do this, and I am sorry, but you guys are you're really attorneys, and you have an office in Indiana. Could you plug what you guys do and how people can get a hold of you if they're interested in getting your help?
Yeah, so like you said, we're both attorneys. We both care deeply about people's individual rights and freedom, and we focus our practice on protecting people's rights in court. But we also promote people's rights outside of court, outside of our law practice. We're firearms instructors, and we love doing this. We love promoting freedom and personal responsibility. If you want to get in touch with us, we have a website for our law practice at ulilaw.com. We also have a firearms training business at o2gungroup.com. We periodically blog, but if people want to get in touch with us, our contact information is on both of those websites.
Yeah, Paul, I would just say if it's a firearms-related deal, look us up at ulilaw.com, particularly in Indiana. And this is going to shameless plug, but Alex actually wrote an article on this very subject we're talking about today, and it was what was it in, Alex? The Truth About Guns, and it's on our blog, but it's about the sanctuary movement, and I would, if we can, I don't know how to do that, put some kind of link down below so folks can look at that, because, obviously I'm biased, but I think he did a great job in this article that he wrote, so we'll put that
Sure.
down below.
I'll make sure that's in the first comment as this posts. So if you're catching this on Facebook or on YouTube, just look in the comments section and that'll be in there before we ever go live. So, gentlemen, that is all the time we have for today, though. I do want to thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Everybody, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or like our Facebook page. And when you subscribe on YouTube, hit that notification button so you know when we're live again and you can watch us, which will be coming back at you tomorrow. Thanks for watching, everybody.